Thank you. Welcome to this public meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We are always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or other matters of important interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation. Law limits discussion of individual, personnel, and confidential matters. We hope that our meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community. Thank you for attending.
As required under the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 1046 et sequentia, adequate notice was given for calling this regular scheduled in-person meeting. It was authorized by the Board of Education and forwarded to the municipal clerk, Princeton Packet, and the Times on January 6, 2023, and distributed to the schools and others on the standard distribution list. The board reserves the right to enter into executive session during all meetings of the Board of Education. Board Policy 2230 recording devices requires that we inform those attending this meeting that the proceedings are being recorded. This meeting is being live streamed. Public members who wish to make comments at the appropriate time will be asked to come to the podium to make their comments. The representative of the Sending District is authorized to vote on such matters that affect Sending District students or affect the governance of the Princeton Public Schools as more specifically designated in NJSA 18A 38.8.1. In the event this statute is amended, the law shall take precedence over this bylaw. Sending District votes pertaining to personnel actions refer to high school, central administrative, and district-wide staff only. Votes otherwise are considered abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. Would you please call the roll?
Daphne Kendall.
Here.
Betsy Baglio.
Here.
Beth Barron.
Here.
Debbie Bronfeld.
Here.
Jean Durbin.
Present.
Mara Franceschi.
Here.
Brian McDonald.
Present.
Susan Cantor.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. Can I please get a motion for item D1, adoption of the minutes for January 3rd, 2023? Brian, second. Jean?
Daphne Kendall.
Yes.
Betsy Baglio.
Yes.
Beth Barron.
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld.
Yes.
Jean Durbin.
Yes.
Mara Franceschi.
Yes.
Brian McDonald.
Yes.
Susan Cantor.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. We're moving on to item E1, board member recognition.
So this is a resolution in honor of New Jersey School Board Recognition Month. Whereas New Jersey State Board of Education, which adopts the administrative code to implement state education laws, establish rigorous standards through its promulgation of the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, which set the expectations of academic achievement for nearly 1.4 million public school children. And whereas New Jersey's locally elected and appointed boards of education play a vital role in ensuring that their local school districts meet state standards and adhere to state and federal education statutes and regulations with the goal of preparing all students for college and the workplace, thereby enabling them to compete in a global economy. And whereas New Jersey's 5,000 nonpartisan local board of education members and charter school trustees are public servants who dedicate their time without pay or benefit to the oversight of school district operations, sound financial practices, comprehensive policies, curriculum, staffing, and the well-being and academic achievement of all students in the district. And whereas the effects of local boards of education in conjunction with the state education officials and local educators have built a foundation of success that has led to New Jersey's status as a leader in student achievement, as evidenced by the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores. And whereas the National School Boards Association and the New Jersey School Boards Association have declared January 2023 to be School Board Recognition Month. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the New Jersey State Board of Education and the Acting Commissioner of Education recognize the contributions of our state's local boards of education to the academic success of its public school students and express its sincere appreciation to local Board of Education members for their continued focus on the achievement of children throughout New Jersey. And be it further resolved that the New Jersey State Board of Education and the Acting Commissioner of Education encourages qualified New Jersey citizens to consider serving as members on their local school boards. And we, more importantly, as central administrators here, thank our Board of Education for their extremely hard work and dedication to this community.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bolden. Very well said. Thank you for reading that. Very impressive. So we're moving now to item F1, President's Comments. I just want to welcome everyone to our first official meeting of 2023, and I wanted to wish those celebrating a very happy Lunar New Year. We have a busy meeting tonight, so we'll move on. We have our required annual school board code of ethics training with our attorney, Mr. LaPura. Item F2 is board committee and liaison reports, and that's on our website, and it just lists the committees and the chairs and the board members assigned to those committees for this year. Oh, and it's up there on the screen too. And now we're going to move to Andre and Rohan, our student board members. We're moving you up in the agenda, so if you want to leave, so you don't have to sit through our school ethics training, end of the marking period, you're free to go. Now, Mr. Bolden, they emailed something they would like on the screen, so I will move out of the way. Turn it over to you guys.
Think they changed it? Yeah. We used to really.
What?
This looks really good. It's easy to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much clearer.
Yep.
Just give me 1 second.
You're running out of storage, Matt.
Wow.
Yeah.
Without them
So,
speaking.
I guess. Oh. Okay. So since the last board meeting and also our last conversation with Dr. Kelly, we thought one thing that we would take on is working on making a more accessible mental health resource for students. We've been periodically meeting with Ms. Karras, the head of counseling, and she provided us a much more detailed resource. And so I think like we took that and sort of worked it into this infographic that we're showing you right now. If everyone wants to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so the problem we were just trying to address was that a lot of students in the high school really weren't aware of what the school offered, and we have so much money and so much resources going into like these staff that can help with counseling and help these students with whatever their psychological needs are, but a lot of students didn't know they're accessible. And so, as Andre said, we compiled all of the resources in the student resource guide that's on the school website into this infographic, and we're gonna use social media as well as Ms. Lag is gonna spread it through Canvas and through the school's Instagram. And we're possibly thinking of hanging up in the bathrooms or in the hallways so that students can, without having to read a long paragraph, can easily see what the school offers.
Yeah, so again, if you have any suggestions, just like let us know. Yeah, we're really excited about this, I guess. Also, like just some more general updates. We had the career fair yesterday, which I guess according to the feedback of our friends was pretty successful. Everybody really enjoyed getting to see lots of different career options during the career fair. So
yeah, just one comment that a lot of students had was that they wish they could have chosen who they got to go see. But other than that, we felt like for being our first career day, it was really a success and really inspired a lot of students to really helped a lot of students to learn about specific fields and actually get to ask questions to people in that field. So.
All right, well, thank you very much for your report. Can I ask when that will be circulated throughout the high school community?
So we already got this approved by Ms. Ligas and by Ms. Karras. So really just like as soon as if you have any feedback, as soon as you tell us that, then we'll circulate it as immediately as possible.
Thanks. I love the infographic and thanks for your report. I also was a volunteer at the career fair, as many of us were as moderators, and I thought the energy was it was really uplifting. I just wanted to clarify. I thought everybody cycled through all the panels.
No, actually, it was basically by homeroom. There's more. I'm pretty sure there's more panels than there were periods of
that right?
moving. So
In many ways, that's a good thing.
no, for sure.
And I'd be interested in, did you learn anything?
Oh, sorry. One thing I learned definitely was we met one in my final session. We met one person who's working in a private equity firm, but he talked about how he started off in like biology and then switched to engineering and then switched to accounting and then eventually ended up in finance. So it really showed me that although we have to make decisions in college, you should still go for what you want to do because it's always possible to go and pursue what you want. It's not, you don't have to like limit yourself in college.
Good.
So we were just saying, we love the infographic. I think it's really eye-catching, it's easy to read, it's small, so you could post it in the bathrooms or in the hallways, so great job. I think the one thing, I guess, because number 4 with Miss City being out, is that why there wasn't a name there? So once we get that name from high school, I think you're ready to go, and if you want to start putting it out there, I think it looks wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, really, this is fabulous. I mean, we asked you how would you get it out there, and you guys did it. I mean, you really did it, so thank you. Because the holidays, everything, I'm telling you, I'm very, very impressed. I would put it in every stall, okay? And I would put it the way the person faces. No, and seriously, because in the bathroom sometimes it's ridiculous. Yeah. But seriously, I would put it in every bathroom. I would give it to every teacher. It should be all over. I mean, this is really fabulous. And it's exciting. It's exciting. And I know you're going to do, the online and things, but it's great to have this in print. Really, you guys did an amazing job. Thank you.
And I'll echo the thanks of my colleagues as well. It's really incredible. So thank you for doing it. I wonder if, since these are going to be hung up, some of them, if you had QR codes next to each, that if a student put their phone up, would it show the photo of the person or contact information, some way to make it even easier? I don't know how, I'm not trying to add to your plate at all. Your plates are very full, but perhaps some of us could help with that as well. Just to allow someone who really needed help then and there, sort of, here's who I go to and where I find them. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. We could definitely implement that. And we'll over the next week, we'll probably try to add that in and maybe also link the more detailed doc in case they want to read even more about each part. But also to Ms. Tu's comment, I was just wondering, so do you want us to, should we wait until we find a new name for the coordinator of student services?
Sorry, I would check back tomorrow to see if they have a name, because I know is there someone on the agenda tonight? Yeah, there is someone on the agenda tonight, so you should be able to add that tomorrow, because I don't want to hold you guys up either. I want you to get it out there. Yeah.
No problem.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I do have one suggestion now that I've thought about it. What do you think, and this is totally your call in conjunction with the professionals, but what do you think about adding the star 9, I think it's 988 number, the suicide hotline? Just a suggestion, but run that by Ms. Karras.
Yeah, I think we'll incorporate all your feedback, talk back with her. Then we'll also send you guys back out a final version just for you to see before we send it.
Okay.
Thank you for your.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Absolutely. Well, President Pinto, can I just say a few things? I think I'm on. I am so proud of you. This exemplifies what leadership is. You saw an issue, you got feedback, you tested out some solutions, and you are going to impact close to 2,000 students by your work. So thank you so much for your leadership. Bravo to you.
And all the students coming after this, so even more.
And with that, if you would like to leave, you are free to go. You were warned, and so now I will turn it over to Mr. Lapira from Fogarty and Hara, who will administer our annually required code of ethics training.
Okay, thanks so much. Is this working? Is that good? Okay, great. Yeah, Andre and Rohan, I know that it's probably a difficult decision. Do you want to go home or listen to this probably fascinating conversation about school ethics? But I won't be insulted either way. Feel free. So in terms of school ethics, this is the month that we talk about school ethics in particular. We keep it on our minds at all times, obviously, but annually we talk about it, usually either at the reorg meeting or slightly after. So we have a good group of board members here who have a fair amount of experience and have probably sat through this presentation in some way, shape, or form several times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to characterize it as the condensed version because you are volunteers and you volunteer many hours, and we don't need to make it take longer than it needs to. So we'll give kind of the condensed version of this. So the first thing I want to talk about is the role of the board member and the role of the board, right? So the board acts in general based upon what New Jersey says you can do. Title 18A of the New Jersey statutes basically sets forth all the different things that the board can do. Generally speaking, it's making sure that you're following the rules of the New Jersey State Board of Education. That's critical. In fact, if we don't do that, that could be a School Ethics Act violation. You have to make, amend, and appeal rules for the government management of the schools and the employees. Obviously, you do that. You have board policies, so forth and so on. And then there's that catch-all, all acts and do all things consistent with the laws and rules of the state board, necessary for the lawful and proper conduct, equipment, and maintenance of the district. So that's the general, high-level overview of what the statute says. Then, well, what does that mean exactly? I mean, the things that you do, that you do every year, approving curriculum, adopting a budget, hiring personnel, all of those different things, developing policies. Those are all things that the board is doing as a whole, as a unit. I think I don't know why I saw this, but I think I saw a prior presentation one of your attorneys had put on saying, it's kind of like Voltron, which is a reference that only certain people within certain age references are going to get. But I'm kind of within that age reference, so I get it. But, ultimately, it's not one individual, or even, frankly, I would say it's not even a group of individuals that's doing it. It's the board as an entity, right? That is who is acting. And you're typically acting based upon recommendations from the superintendent of schools, right? And so when you are acting as a board, there's a number of things that you're required to do and various obligations. Obviously, we have HIB appeals for students. If you have long-term suspension hearings, luckily you don't really have a lot of those or haven't had those in many years. Residency appeals, that happens from time to time. Grievances that have to do with the collective negotiations agreement. These are all things that the board is going to take like an active role in terms of hearings before the board. Terminations for cause, if it's personnel, as opposed to, for example, a non-renewal, although as we see, a non-renewal could turn into a hearing before the board if they request what's colloquially known as a Donaldson hearing based upon the Donaldson case from years ago. And increment withholdings, those are types of things that the board has to do, takes action. So we also talk about when the board acts, right? And when the board is constituted technically. So the board is only functioning when it's in session and you have a quorum like we have here tonight. It's required in order to take action. When we meet, we have to make sure that we comply, and we do, with the Open Public Meetings Act and all the requirements that come through that. That doesn't apply to committee meetings. We all, I think, know that, but just in case the public doesn't know, committee meetings are less than a quorum of the full board. So here, where you have 10 board members, a committee meeting can be 5 or less. And that doesn't have to be open to the public, doesn't have to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. You don't have to give rice notices. If, for example, you're discussing personnel in a personnel committee meeting, those things are all fine. I have a little bullet point here, emails and text messages, which is kind of cryptic. But what I really want to let people know is that I would say probably 20 years ago, when people started using, at least board members started using emails more often than they had in years past, a concern really came up about, well, if board members are constantly texting, well, not texting 20 years ago, maybe to some degree, but if they're constantly emailing each other, does that constitute a meeting? And would that violate the Open Public Meetings Act? After all, nobody else is here to see what the board is deliberating. So I think that's a theoretical thing that could happen. What we always tell boards of ed is that sometimes you will send out, whether it's the board president or whomever, will send out an update to all board members so they have the information. Typically, you see at the top, please do not reply all. We're not going to have a meeting. We're not going to discuss this. This is an FYI, information only. That doesn't mean that board members can't email each other. Of course you can. But what I would stress is just make sure that there's not a flood of emails going back and forth. So now we have everyone who's on the board emailing everyone within like a 10-minute, session. There's 20 emails exchanged. That starts to look like you're having a meeting, right? The same thing with text messages and text message chains. I have seen those in some places. I've somehow found that I was on one of these text message chains with a whole bunch of board members. I said, all right, well, now we're talking about matters involving the attorney-client privilege. Fine, but sometimes that can happen. But just be careful about that. I don't really see anyone actually violating that in any school district, but it's the concept that it could come up. So when we talk about, again, the role that the board has and what the board is doing, it is really, you're going to hear, and you've probably heard from whether you had the presentation done by New Jersey school boards or an attorney. The big thing is policymaking, planning, and appraisal, right? The PPA, the thing that I hear all the time whenever we talk about school ethics. And that is the role of the board. And I think sometimes the public doesn't appreciate that, although many of the public members know, what the board's role is. But a lot of times, especially for new board members, they get on the board, the public starts asking them, well, why are you hiring this person? And why are you doing this? And so forth and so on. Can't you change this? Well, no, we do policy making, planning, and appraisal. We do not administer the school on a day-to-day basis. You hire a superintendent to do that, you hire a business administrator to handle the business aspects. And that's specifically in the school board member code of ethics, which is referenced there. It's 18A 12-24.1, and we'll review each one of those actually later in the presentation, but that's 24.1D, not to administer the schools, but to see that they are well run. And that's the critical function of the board. Imagine as if for folks who maybe are thinking of it from the corporate world, you've got a board of directors and you've got a CEO and a CFO. So your superintendent is your CEO, your CFO is your business administrator, and the board members here serve like as a board of directors. So your board policy kind of piggybacks on this, or your bylaw 0146 talks about that you can't exercise any administrative responsibility with regard to the operation of the school district, or as an individual, command the services of the school district employee. It's not all access to district schools. I think your board policy also says that if you're visiting schools for any reasons, you have to observe district regulations for all school visitors. Everyone's treated equally in that regard. No special treatment for board members. And then the board is basically delegating, as I said before, certain responsibilities to those administrative officials. So the superintendent, keeping the board informed, but making all of the critical decisions. There are decisions that require board approval, and those will come to you. Making operational recommendations, but basically running the school district every day. And then as far as the school business administrator, maintaining the budget, preparing the budget, doing all the things that are required to run that business office. So I always have this slide in there, which I always think is like an awkward slide, but I always put it up there because it's an important thing to talk about, the board and the administration. So the relationship is cooperative. It's not adversarial. And so what we always say, and I think you probably have heard this from your New Jersey school boards consultants as well, if there are concerns, we always recommend share those with the administration in advance of the meetings, because that means that there's a higher likelihood that when there is a public response, it's going to be one that's knowing, we've had time to think about it, so forth and so on. And then think about which of those matters should really be private discussions as opposed to public discussions. And you have a policy that deals with this, board policy number 9130, that talks about when you have a community complaint. This is kind of referring to what I was talking about there. You might be on the soccer field or in the supermarket or whatever you may be, where someone brings up a concern for you about a specific thing. Why is I have a problem with this teacher, or I have a problem with this, whatever the case may be. The code of ethics and your policy is pretty clear that when you get that, you refer those issues to the superintendent. And the superintendent has the responsibility, because the superintendent is the person who's doing the day-to-day administration of the school district. The superintendent has the responsibility to address that issue. And your policy and the school board member code of ethics both say that the board should only act at a public meeting after there's a failure of an administrative solution, right? So that is, when you're in the supermarket, wherever you are, and people say, well, you need you to do something about this, we just say, you need to talk to the superintendent. Please refer it to the superintendent. And if the superintendent doesn't handle it for whatever reason, then come to us. But we can't be involved on a day-to-day. Also, there's a line there's a requirement in the Code of Ethics that says that you're going to support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties, right? So not undermining school personnel, but supporting them. There was a case, I don't think I have it in this presentation, but there was a case out of Lodi up in Bergen County where there was a board member who maintained a blog, I guess, a website, whatever it was, and said all sorts of nasty things about various school personnel, including the head of the teachers union, so forth and so on. That crossed the line. That board member was suspended for several months as appropriate because that wasn't properly supporting and protecting school personnel. And again, it's if there's deliberate action or things like that. And I say it doesn't mean that you can't disagree with a recommendation that's made by the superintendent, but generally speaking, there's support for the superintendent. And we always say we have to be careful about who we criticize in board meetings, whether it's a superintendent or any personnel member, like in public. That's the important thing to recall. But again, doesn't mean, and I always say this, the board is not a rubber stamp either. I mean, the board members are making sure as part of their role that they are ensuring that the schools are well run, not running the schools. So again, this kind of touches on when I talk about the role of the board member, it's a unit, not a collection of individuals. We kind of talked about that. When the board acts, it's majority vote, then you go from there. Doesn't mean that people can't vote no, but generally speaking, when the board is voting, once that decision has been made, the expectation is that ultimately we can say that, well, I voted no on this, but the board as a whole voted yes. So now we need to support that going forward. Generally speaking, as we kind of talk about, the president usually speaks on the board behalf and nobody else necessarily, although certainly people can express their opinions. But usually if there is a specific question that's being asked from the public perhaps or whatever, the response is generally from the board president, sometimes members of the administration as the case may be. Board policy 146 or the bylaw 146 says that, and we talked about this, you can't exercise any administrative responsibility or supervisory responsibility. The board members individually can't do that. Again, it's the board as a whole. Confidentiality, something that we talk about and we know very well, but it is in the school board member code of ethics that we've got to preserve whatever information that we learn that's confidential in your role as a board member. It has to stay confidential. Probably, I'm guessing that other people say the same thing, but it's kind of like going to Las Vegas, right? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I would say what happens in executive session stays in executive session. Same kind of thing there. And because it could, for a variety of reasons, number one, the school board member code of ethics requires it. Number two, potentially opens people up to liability, opens the school district up to liability. So it's important. People always ask, or at least theoretically people ask, I haven't had the question in many years, but can I tell my spouse about this? No. Can I tell my kids? No, you can't tell anybody. You can talk to all the other board members. That's pretty much it, and the administration. So it has to be kept confidential. And again, it doesn't even matter if it might affect, your own kids or your friends or whatever. The example that we use is, let's say we're in closed session and we learn that we have to suspend a teacher pending the results of a psychiatric examination. Maybe the teacher looks like he or she has a deviation from normal mental health. We want to make sure that teacher is okay. We want to make sure the kids are safe. So we send that person out for a psychiatric evaluation. Some time will go by. We'll get confirmation they're fit to return. No problem. But we can't tell anybody about that, right? It could be someone in your kid's class, and they could say, "Why is Mrs. So-and-so out?" Or "Why is Mr. So-and-so out?" I don't know. And even if I did know, I can't talk about it. That's the response, right? And I think everyone here knows that, but it's part of the presentation, so we talk about that. So the school board member code of ethics is really what I would characterize as puts appropriate limits or guardrails, in terms of what board members are able to do. This was enacted interestingly enough, not that long ago, it was only 22 years ago, back in 2001. Prior to that, there was nothing specific, but it was enacted in 2001, setting forth all these various standards. So what is the impact of that? What can happen? Well, if there's a violation of the school board member code of ethics, someone could file a complaint with the School Ethics Commission. It's basically a division of the Department of Education. And if someone files a complaint, they will look into it. They may hold hearings. And if there is a violation, there can be a variety of effects. It could be what we would call a reprimand, which is basically you get a letter stating that you violated the code of ethics, don't do that again. It could be censure, which is more significant. That actually requires the board to read at a board meeting that they were censured by the School Ethics Commission, which is never a good look. We don't want to do that if we don't have to. And suspension and removal are pretty clear. It's rare to see a removal case. We did see one a couple of years ago where I'm going to say that a board member in a certain school district, not one that we represented, thank God, but basically took it upon himself to become the superintendent and started doing all sorts of things that were completely outside the role of a board member. And the excuse that the board member used was that, well, I didn't have confidence that the superintendent was going to do these things, so I went ahead and did them. Guess what? Wrong answer. That was not the appropriate response. And that person did actually lose his seat on a board. So as we know, if you have a situation where, I mean, the only person that the board evaluates is the superintendent. And so if there's an issue with the superintendent, it's part of the evaluation process. That's where it comes up. But you can't step in the role. In terms of your policy, the policy incorporates both the Code of Ethics, which is in section 24.1, and there's another section that's called the Prohibited Acts. Those are things that you specifically can't do that would be regarded as conflicts of interest. And those, I think, are maybe like the second to last slide or the last slide, but those are fairly self-explanatory. If there are allegations that are based upon private action outside the performance of one's duties as a board member, and it's not within the duties of a board member, then you're not entitled to indemnification if someone files a School Ethics Act complaint against you. And so you'd have to defend that at your own expense. But there are some times when these SEC or School Ethics Act cases come up, and typically the board members are entitled to have a defense paid for by the board. So in terms of the actual Code of Ethics, so these are the things that we'll kind of dive into here. So and we'll kind of read. A, I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. So what's an example of someone not doing that? There was a board, I think it was, I don't remember which one, but up in the northwestern corner of New Jersey, there was a sending receiving relationship, I think, with Montague, and they used to send their kids to High Point Regional, but then they also used to send some other kids to some high school in New York State, which was a very weird situation up there. And there was a board member who basically was saying, yes, I know that we have this sending receiving agreement, but we're not going to, as a board, follow it. We're just going to do our own thing. Guess what? Can't do that. And that board member got into trouble for doing that. So you have to follow the laws of the state board and all court orders pertaining to schools. There was a court order in that case saying you have to follow the sending receiving agreement. B, make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet individual needs of all children, regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing. That one I think is pretty universal. I think every board that we've ever kind of represented always commits to that. C, confine board action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal. It's the PPA I spoke about before. And I will help frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted with those who will be affected by them. So that's typically part of your process, whether it's part of a policy committee or whether it's part of the work that you do in various committees. It could also be part of the discussions that you have here when members of the public come and they say, oh, I see there's a policy up for approval. I want to comment on that. I mean, that's one of the ways of soliciting input as well. Carry out the responsibility not to administer the schools, but to make sure that they're well run. We talked about that one. I recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education, will make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board. So this is one that comes up a lot in terms of communications, whether it's through social media or whether it's through letters to the editor and things like that. Oftentimes, if you don't specifically disclose that you're a board member and you're making this statement as an individual, not on behalf of the board, that's where the School Ethics Commission has said, no, that's taking private action that might compromise the board. So that's one example of that. F is refusing to surrender your independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups, or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends. Pretty straightforward. I mean, we typically say, sometimes people will say, hey, I'm looking to get a job. Can I get it? I know that you're on the Board of Ed. Can you help me with that? You say, just go to Applitrack or whatever it is, fill it out. I can't be involved in any of that. G, hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools, which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. We kind of reviewed that already. In other matters, I'll provide accurate information and, in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its schools. Sometimes we see violations of these with some of the cases that come up about not providing accurate information, but these are pretty rare. I would say more often than not, the cases that come up do not really allege violations of these, but some of them do. H is voting to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the chief administrative officer. I know that everyone here knows this, but sometimes members of the public don't. Even though the board votes on hiring, all of those recommendations by statute have to come from the superintendent of schools, right? So if the superintendent doesn't recommend someone, we can't say, well, I want to make a motion to hire so-and-so. Well, you can't. That's not the role of the board member. And then J, refer all complaints to the chief administrative officer and act at complaints at public meetings only after the failure of an administrative solution. Oh, and also I skipped I, sorry. Support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. So we talked about those, but those are specifically in the Code of Ethics. So everyone remembers what those are. And again, this is the next slide kind of talks about examples of things that would violate the Code of Ethics. So, Section D, if we're giving direct orders to school personnel, or getting directly involved in some kind of day-to-day functions, that's a problem. Taking deliberate action that, and again, deliberate action that's going to undermine or compromise or harm school personnel, problem. And finally, acting to resolve a complaint or conducting an investigation without referring to the superintendent. We have a case that in this presentation that talks exactly about that. So in terms of the limits, I mean, most of these really pertain, but not exclusively, to personnel. As we talked about before, the board's role in hiring is really based upon recommendations from the superintendent. And that's not to say, because sometimes I have board members ask me different school districts, so does that mean that we're just a rubber stamp? No, you're not a rubber stamp. If the superintendent makes a recommendation and you disagree with it, can you, I mean, hopefully this happens few and far between, but can you say, no, I'm not going to vote yes on this? Yes, you can. But can it be for arbitrary or capricious reasons? No, it can't. It has to be for good reasons. So that's pretty clear. And in terms of hiring, what we always recommend, and I'm quite sure the New Jersey School Board Association will say the same thing, really limit involvement in hiring to the superintendent of schools. And then when the superintendent makes recommendations about other people, that's what we would be looking at to follow. There are some boards that want to be involved in the interview process on certain levels. It's not completely impermissible, but it's strongly discouraged. And I think there's a slide about that later too. So in terms of the advisory opinions, the School Ethics Act, or the School Ethics Commission rather, gives a lot of these advisory opinions. So sometimes board members want to ask for an advisory opinion before they do something to make sure that there's not a problem. One of them was at A1510. Can the board members go and start participating in exit interviews of staff members to figure out why are people leaving? No, you can't do that. Can the administration do it? Yes, it can. But again, this is now going beyond policymaking, planning, and approval. Interviewing personnel, as we talked about previously. So I think there was a long history in certain districts of people sitting on interview committees and things like that. Usually it's for significant administrative positions, right? Whether it's principals, whether it's directors or things of that nature. And what this advisory opinion says is that, okay, you can do it, but it's got to be very limited. You can't conduct the interview. You can basically sit there, offer some feedback to the superintendent, But at the end of the day, you can't participate in such a fashion that would undermine the superintendent's responsibility. And the concept is that you're not going to be influencing the superintendent. The superintendent is going to make her decision, right? I think that if you're giving feedback implicitly, there's some level of influencing there, but it has to be done in such a way where we're saying, this is just the way I feel, and just so you know, that's fine. In terms of other advisory opinions, so this is on the next slide. It's kind of funny in my mind because here you are volunteering your time, and let's say you want to volunteer more time. What the School Ethics Commission says is not too much, actually. Be careful what you do. And the reason for that is because it's not so much the amount of time, but it's the nature of the volunteering, right? So participating in school theatrical productions, with casting, rehearsal, lighting, stuff like that, it's a problem because in that particular advisory opinion, the gentleman who was going to do that was going to be spending a lot of time with the students, with the staff, probably would have the board member giving direct orders to school personnel. That's verboten. It's going to be a problem. Volunteering to be a leader of a school club, right? Which is something that we normally have our staff members do. They get stipends for those things, whatnot. Again, oversight and authority of students goes beyond policymaking, planning, and appraisal, so we really can't do that either. They specifically said it would blur the line between the role of a board member and as a volunteer in the building by kind of taking on day-to-day administrative tasks. In contrast, there was a case that talked about a volunteer who was, once again, with the school play, but in this case, really just constructing the sets and doing some of the background work, limited to no interactions with students and staff. That wasn't a problem. Also assisted the marching band. I think had a child in the marching band, building some props, repairing some equipment, unloading equipment, taking it out to the field. That's fine. Was not directing staff, was not taking direction from staff. That's also problematic, right? I mean, can't be in a position to be an assistant coach and then you have a staff member who's now giving you directives. That's not going to work either. And then finally, if there's a local education foundation, can you also serve as a trustee of the local education foundation? Absolutely. The only thing that you can't do is if there's something that you're voting on for the education foundation as a board member, you can't vote on that. You have to abstain. So easy enough. In the next slide, we talk about some other notable decisions. I sadly know about this first case because we were involved in tangential way because we had a board member who went to the board office, didn't give any notice to the administration, superintendent wasn't there, director of human resources wasn't there, said, I want to look at the resumes right now, and then said, well, we don't have the resumes. They're in a locked office where the HR person is. And they said, well, get the key, get the custodian so I can go in there and look at these resumes. Not okay. And so what happened? There was a hearing on that. One of my partners had to testify in the hearing because he was a fact witness, and they censured the board member, and I had to read that at a board meeting. So that was an uncomfortable situation, but again, they shouldn't have been doing what they were doing. Can a board member say, we're going to give a rice notice to the business administrator without telling the superintendent? No. And I'm not suggesting anything, Matt. It's got to be the person. That's the case that came up. But no, you can't do that. Ultimately, the superintendent is who issues the rice notices. And for the public, the rice notices are, there was Rice versus Union County Board of Education from probably 40 or 50 years ago that says that in order to give staff members a meaningful opportunity to elect to have a discussion about them held in public, which they have the right under the Open Public Meetings Act, you have to let them know it's happening. You can't just do it, and because if they don't know it's happening, they can't make that election. So Rice says you have to give a notice. The board can't do that. The only person that the board can give a Rice notice to is to the superintendent, and that's typically, yeah. Sure.
What happened in that case where the board member Rice?
If I recall, I think it was I don't remember if it was a reprimand or a censure, but it wasn't like a removal. It was an issue. That was something that they should not have done. What they should have done is say to the superintendent, we have concerns. Do you share these concerns? If you do, maybe we should talk about the business administrator and give the person a rice notice.
You said ricing for open. There's also ricing.
Oh, so let me clarify that. So the reason that we give the rice notices is because all of these discussions are going to be held in closed session unless the employee says, no, I want to hear that. I want it to be an open session when you discuss my employment. And so if they don't get the notice, then they can't elect to have it in open. That's, yeah, sorry about the confusion there.
I have a question about the review of resumes.
Mhm.
So it really doesn't matter whether there was prior notice to the administration or not, correct?
Well, so what you could have is, this is the way that I see it. Generally speaking, the resumes of the candidate who's being recommended for approval, those are shared. That's not a problem. The resumes of the folks who are not being recommended for approval, generally speaking, that's not something that is normally looked at. Can the superintendent say, look, this is, I mean, for example, I'm hiring someone, and you say, well, I don't know if we, love that person. That I feel like we should see something more. That doesn't seem like the most impressive resume. And the superintendent could say, well, here's 10 resumes that I got for this position, and you tell me if you think any of these were better, right? I mean, that's okay. You can have that conversation, and I think that you can review resumes in the presence of the superintendent. That kind of thing can be okay. But again, generally speaking, it shouldn't be what I would call a process where we're like, well, let's see all the resumes because we don't think the superintendent is looking at the resumes or doing whatever, right? I mean, that's ordinarily not the role.
Just going into the personnel office and saying, I want to see the resumes of all the people who applied for positions.
Should always go through the superintendent. Always go through the superintendent, because your superintendent will tell you, yeah, I mean, we selected the best qualified person here, and here were the other candidates. If you want to see the other candidates, that's not a problem. And then the last case that we talked about. So there was this, I don't know, it was a misguided situation. I wasn't involved in this thing, thankfully, but there were 2 board members who thought that the director of special services in that particular school district was double dipping, working somewhere else, and getting paid from 2 districts for doing 2 jobs at the same time. And instead of having it referred to the superintendent, they conducted their own investigation. And they said, here you go, we've got to get rid of this person. They're doing it. Well, of course, then the superintendent investigated it, and guess what? That investigation wasn't that great. The person was not double dipping, and none of those things were happening. So, those are things that we can't do. They both got, I think it was a censure in that case. It might have been a reprimand, but they got significant penalties, so to speak. So then finally, and I'm going to try to see, let's try to wrap up quickly here. In terms of the free speech in the School Ethics Act, there's this weird tension between the restrictions that the School Ethics Act places on board member speech when it comes to, I'm really going to characterize it more as written speech. It's a little bit inconsistent in some ways, but I'm not going to take that on right now, because if a board member is expressing their opinion publicly, whether through a letter to the editor or on a social media post, there's, we talked about before, there's like this script that you have to kind of follow. Identify yourself as a board member, but I am not making this on behalf of the board. These are my own personal opinions. It's interesting that they find School Ethics Act violations there when it's not done perfectly sometimes. But then you could be having a conversation with someone at the football field. And do you say before every time you make a comment, by the way, I'm a board member, but you don't do that. That's not necessary. I think people understand it and realize it. But keep in mind that the School Ethics Act does take a close look at these things. Now, I full disclosure, I have a case going on right now in another school district where there's a question seemingly about when you put a social media post up, do you have to put that disclaimer on every single post and every single reply? I don't really know how you do that. You really can't do it with Twitter, frankly, because you're never going to be able to do the character limitations, right? So it's kind of a little bit of an issue that the School Ethics Act is trying to, I think, grapple with. And it's, I would say, generally speaking, so long as you put the information out there as required and you don't kind of go off the rails with your comments, you'll be okay. But there have been cases where they said, yeah, you can make those disclaimers, but if you go out and share inaccurate information or you are violating confidentiality or doing all these different things, there's still going to be a problem. So that's kind of the thing that we need to know there.
I just have a related
Yeah.
question. We've been advised in the past, I guess it's about referenda specifically, but should the spouse of a board member or a child of a board member, if they speak on an issue, should they be sharing with the public, yes, I'm married to a board member, or my mother's a board member, but these are my own thoughts?
They don't have that legal obligation, and the board member doesn't have that obligation. I mean, they can do that. That's certainly not a problem, but it's not required. Yeah. Yeah. And the next slide just talks about, and I'll just talk about it briefly, when someone wrote an op-ed and the person was endorsing several candidates for the upcoming board election, but openly trying to get a fellow board member not elected, and saying kind of what I would characterize as nasty things about the other board member. And he put the disclaimer language on there, but they said, well, that's not enough, right? I mean, you can't just put the disclaimer language on there and then go ahead and violate the School Ethics Act. So nice try, but that's not going to work. That was in Randolph. So that was the case a couple of years ago. This last piece, I mean, we're going to zoom through this last couple of pieces here, but in terms of guidelines for social media, I don't think I really have to tell everybody that, but you do have this in your policy, and there are numerous things that you should do. What I always kind of tell people about social media, I think, is very simple. Number one, don't put anything out there that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the New York Times, which is kind of an outdated reference. So I'd say don't put anything up there that you want to see go viral, right? And my second thing that I would say is that if you're sitting down and you're composing, whether it's an email or it's a post, whatever it is, and you say, I wonder if someone would find this offensive, you can stop because you answered your own question. If you had to think about it, the answer is yes, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the way that I look at it there. So these are all set forth in your policy, and I mean, they're pretty straightforward. I mean, it's basically saying have respect for others, don't do things that are inappropriate, don't kind of take on the role of answering questions that should really be given to the superintendent, so forth and so on. Finally, conflicts of interest and recusal. Very briefly, if anyone has any potential conflicts of interest, usually because of someone being employed, it usually comes up in context of evaluation of the superintendent. If you have a immediate family member or maybe even a relative employed in the district, that's going to be an issue. Or in negotiations, if you have someone who is related to you who is in the NJEA in some other district, that would also be a problem. So they have a listing of who the relatives are. These are kind of case by case. They're not always automatic recusals or per se conflicts. And there was an advisory opinion that came out in 2015 on the next slide saying that if it's an out-of-district relative, but it's not necessarily a member of the immediate family, someone who doesn't live in your household, that whole kind of thing, it still could be a conflict if either they're an officer in the NJEA or the local education association, or they're on their district's negotiating team, right? Then you can't be part of your district's negotiating team. Or if they have some other kind of leadership role that could influence the outcome of negotiations, maybe they're the grievance chairperson or something like that. When these came out, that did lead to some weird scenarios where people were calling me up saying, I have a cousin who I know is a teacher, but I don't know if they're in, and I haven't spoken to them in years. I don't know if they're in any of these roles. Well, then get friendly with your cousin that you haven't spoken to for a while and find out, But that's really the issue there. And the next page just has a chart that kind of talks about, like, this is like I often look at this chart myself when people call and ask. So, I mean, if you are a member of a similar union, obviously you can't participate in negotiations, but you can vote to ratify the contract and you can participate in superintendent issues. If you have a spouse who is in this union, then you can't do any of that, right? Or dependent child, as the case may be, or even sometimes a non-dependent child, depending upon the circumstances. Well, actually, whenever it's in district, if you have any relative whatsoever, you can't participate in either the negotiations, you can't vote on it, you can't be involved in superintendent negotiations. With dependent children and non-dependent children, there can be some issues there if you can participate or not participate. A lot of times it has to do with whether they're part of another similar union or not. And it's all set forth on that chart. The one issue that kind of comes up is if you have a spouse who's in a similar union but not in this district, you cannot participate in negotiations, but you can vote to ratify the contract. And then finally, this is the final slide coming up, is that these are the prohibited acts. This is different from the school member code of ethics, but prohibited acts, the things that you can't do. You can't be involved in a business or activity that's in substantial conflict with your public duties. That's pretty rare. It doesn't come up a lot. But for example, back in the day, what it would be if you were involved and you were when the elections were in April and you had to approve the school budgets, you couldn't also serve as like the town administrator or in the town council, wherever the case may be, because that could potentially be incompatible. Can't use your position to secure unwarranted privileges, advantages, or employment for yourself or others. that talks about, potentially referring friends or things like that. If you have an immediate relative or a business organization which you have an interest, you need to, and that's an item on the agenda, you need to recuse from that. Not accepting employment in any capacity that might otherwise not influence, but prejudice you in exercising your official duties. Obviously, gifts, favors, loans, etc. If someone is telling you, hey, I'm going to give you this gift, and I know that you're going to vote yes on this issue, that's not okay. But I think we know that. But in some places of New Jersey, I think there is a long tradition of that. Not here, in other places, and that is specifically since 2001. They say you can't do that. And you can't use non-public knowledge for financial gain. So if we know that something is going to go up for sale, you can't be the bidder on that at a later date with all the insider information. So it's kind of like insider trading. So anyway, I went a little bit over what I wanted to do, but that is the condensed version of the School Ethics Act. Sorry. Thanks.
You made that very entertaining. Thank you.
I try to. It's not quite as the same as when you do other presentations that are about racier topics, but this is as good as we can make it.
Well, thankfully, we don't have racier topics.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions?
All right, thanks. Well, have a
Thank
great
you
rest
so
of your
much.
meeting, and thank you for volunteering. School Board Member Appreciation Month.
Thank you, Vic. Take care. Okay, now we'll move on to item I1, the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. Before we have our presentation this evening, I wanted to go over that on tonight's agenda are the calendars, the school calendars for the school year 24 and school year 25 for the board's consideration and approval. I would like to point out, because I do know that the board received a question regarding the 2 days that we are closed for election. There is not a state requirement for schools to close. However, I believe since the unfortunate incident that happened over 10 years ago at Sandy Hook, most schools that have polling locations in their school, in terms of best practice, are closing. So we are closed in November and also in June. I also want to point out that administration and also board members have have spoken to the town clerk and other individuals to see if we could find a different polling location. We don't want to take away the individual's rights to vote, though. So currently, the locations are in our schools. We have also, as a superintendent roundtable in Mercer County, have spoken to our executive county superintendent to ask if the Department of Education could also advocate on behalf of schools, because we would much prefer to have our students in school, but due to safety issues, we feel that it is best practice for our schools not to be open on those days. Yes, Debbie?
Can I comment on
Yes.
on this one now?
Yes.
Before we vote? Okay. First, I really want to thank you, Dr. Kelly, and your team for making the calendars available. People have been asking for us to do 2 years, and really thank you for that, because it makes people really happy. I really want to comment on the days being taken as, for the general and the primary election day. And I know you did give me the green light to talk to the town about moving voting out of our 4 elementary schools. I've hit a lot of roadblocks. But there's some background I wanted to share. There's 22 districts in Princeton. In 2018, there were 15 voting sites in our town. In 2022, there's only 9 voting sites, and 4 of those happen to be our elementary schools. So since 2018, residents no longer vote at the charter school, the Honey School, Princeton Academy, Princeton United Methodist Church, or the university. Personally, I've never heard a complaint that there are too few voting places in town, or read a letter to the editor about this. Also in 2022, it was the second year that early voting was allowed as an option. In the last election on 11/8/2022, 17% of votes were done early, 37 were mail-in votes, and 46% were cast on election day. Just to give you an idea. For me personally, the Parkland shooting on 2/14/18 was really the catalyst that pushed me to question why are we still voting in our schools. I know in Lawrenceville, they don't vote in any of the schools, and in Pennington, they don't vote in any of the schools, so I am looking for any assistance to really move voting out of our schools. It also gives you and your administration team 2 more days for when you want to have days off, not, based on this. So I would, really love to get this out. And I don't know how or why they left the charter, the HUN. I don't know how the university just said you can't vote here anymore. Yeah, so these are real facts. Only 46% were really voting even on election day. So if anybody would like to help me.
I appreciate your comments, and when I first joined the board in 2016, I was discussing moving voting out of the schools. And thank you to Dr. Kelly and her team. They've had discussions, but it's really out of our hands now. We've made it clear that this interrupts our educational programming. It extends the school year. We know kids learn better earlier in the year than later in the year. But I think I'm not sure what else we can do.
Right, I feel like tonight, there's a lot more openness and maybe somebody will be listening. No, I know, I'm so frustrated with it. And then when I started looking more and realizing how fewer sites we have, I didn't realize until I was really looking at the numbers. So I just wanted to share all that with everyone. So, but thanks again for the 2-year view of the calendar. I know people really appreciate that. Thank you.
I know my colleague, Ms. Bronfield, knows that I don't agree. I think that it's important to have voting in schools. I think that when you have one incident, as horrendous as those school shooting incidents have been, they haven't been committed by voters. Having said that, though, what I would say is that if we're getting stonewalled by the town, maybe I should use other language, but that's what it feels like, in terms of addressing where the voting locations are in town, maybe the next step is to reach out to the county clerk because they oversee elections. And then the second place where it wouldn't hurt to write a letter would be the Secretary of State's office. And, again, it's you just have to chip away at it, and it's got to be alternatives because 46% of people voting on election day is still a significant number. And as sensitive as, it's our job to protect the kids in the school, but a lot of people who live in this town and who vote in this town don't have children in the schools. But they pay significant tax burden to keep the schools in operation. And so they want to walk into the schools twice a year. It's kind of hard for us to say that that's not something they should be allowed to do without offering a reasonable alternative. But I would say that if we want to pursue that, I think 2 places that we haven't reached out to were the county clerk and the Secretary of State office.
If I could just add, and thanks for the discussion, it's actually the Board of Elections that chooses these sites and oversees elections. It's not the county clerk. And the Board of Elections is a county thing, so you could also reach out to the county executive's office. And thanks for the discussion. And we do have staff development on these days, right, Dr. Kelly? So they're not like totally useless days. They're staff development days for our team.
They are.
But
Thanks.
they're not chosen by Dr. Kelly and Dr. Tu.
Right.
It's more that. Yeah.
Great discussion.
I just want to add about the calendar to Dr. Kelly and your team. Thank you for the inclusion of additional holidays. You've listened to the community. Students and staff and parents have come to Student Achievement for years on some of these holidays, and I'm really glad to see them represented in these calendars.
Thank you. And would like to thank the board for your support as well. I would like to point out when we are designing the calendars, there are a lot of competing initiatives. One that I heard very loud and clear from the board as well as the community was trying to end the school year earlier. And for the school year 25, you will see right now that the school year is pushed out somewhat. And that is because that we are trying to take into account the diversity of our student body and families by honoring some of the important holidays such as the Lunar New Year, Diwali, and Eid. So, and we want to continue to listen to those voices. So thank you very much. And I will turn the rest
I just have one thing to say about the calendar. I just want to thank our union, specifically our teachers union. Both calendars show staff returning the last week of August, which is, something that the board has wanted to see for a long time. And we're just very lucky to have very good relationships with the union. Again, studies show kids learn better earlier in the school year than at the end of the school year. And this is just something that allows us, yes, in 2025, we're pushed out till the 18th, but some years we've gone, to the 28th. So it's still progress while recognizing and celebrating the diversity we have in our community. So thank you.
And actually, one more comment, just for the parents listening out there, the first day of school for the next 2 years is the day after Labor Day. It's the Tuesday, and I know there was some confusion in the past. We used to start later that week, but now, as Ms. Kendall said, thanks to the collaboration with our union, we are starting on the Tuesday, the day after Labor Day.
Thank you. Without further ado, I would like to turn the mic over to our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. Tu.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Happy Lunar New Year and happy Board Recognition Month. So I am here tonight to present about our Tri-States visit, which you'll see on the slide says November 2022. So we recently received a report from our Tri-States Consortium, and I'll go into what does that entail to the audience. Princeton Public Schools picked our dual language immersion program to be reviewed during this review cycle. So what is Tri-States? So Princeton has been involved in the Tri-States Consortium for about, I want to say 12 years now. It's a really wonderful network of about 57 public school districts that are in Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York. And it's all about being critical friends. So these are top performing school districts like Princeton, and really holding up the mirror to each other and saying what's working, what can be enhanced, what can be improved, and really building a network with one another and saying, we have connections, we have professional development, how can we share services, those type of things. And so they come every 3 years, and the district determines which program they would like them to look at. We could look at literacy, social emotional learning, all different types of things. So this year we picked dual language immersion because we had a formal program review earlier in the summer this year when we first came on, and we really wanted them to get into the classrooms and talk to students and staff and our parent community that participates in our DLI program. And so one of the things and tasks that we do is that we give them 3 essential questions to look for and look at and help us answer. And we have to form an internal executive committee that helps us craft that work and do that work. It's not just Dr. Kelly and Dr. Tu creating these questions. It's a team of Princeton educators and staff members doing this work. And so real quick, for those who aren't in the know, this is a timeline of DLI at PPS. And so it began 10 years ago already. And so it began at planning and CP. That's when Judy Wilson was superintendent here, and that was part of her vision. And in 2015, we had our first kindergarten and first grade cohort. And if you all remember, we had a lottery program system when it was first started because it was very small strand at Community Park Elementary School. Then we went to a full DLI cohort. And then there was a lot of interest in the community. So we said, you don't have to be CP zoned. You could be a Little Brook resident. You could be a Riverside or JP resident and attend the program. So it kind of grew and grew and grew. Our first cohort arrived at the middle school right smack dab at the beginning of the pandemic in September 2020. They are currently 8th graders and will be going to the high school next year. We had our program of studies night last week at the high school for rising 8th graders, and DLI families learned about our program of studies where not only will they be placed in an advanced Spanish, so they will take an exam at the end of this school year to say what level of Spanish they will take based on their proficiency. They will also be able to take a science course, horticulture, in Spanish as well. And that class is welcome to anyone, our English language learners who speak Spanish, anyone in proficient in Spanish. So even if you aren't in the DLI program, but maybe are in AP Spanish later in your high school career, that is also an opportunity for you. So at our middle school, they take social studies and advanced DLI Spanish, and at our high school, they'll be able to take science. So that's sort of where we are at this moment in time. So here's who served on our executive committee. I want to make sure we thank these folks because they helped really put together artifacts. So just like when we have CUSAC reviews through the state, we have to provide examples and a preponderance of evidence when we're looking at these essential questions. And so this team, as you see here, which is a mixture of administrators, educators, and staff in different roles across Community Park and the middle school, because that's where the DLI program is currently housed. They've created here's what our parent communication looks like. Here's what our curriculum looks like, lesson plans, what's our website, our curriculum, everything that you could think of, our special ed procedures, so that the team that visited got a really well-rounded experience of learning what does it look like at Princeton Public Schools. Oh, my computer just froze. There we go. A little slow on the uptake there. So they come for 3 days. They set up camp here, and they love coming to Princeton because Princeton's a lovely town to stay in. So they have a lot of great restaurant options. The tree was decorated, and they came at the end of November and early December, and they were just like, wow, what a lovely community. So they never have a hard time finding people to come to visit us. So we had 14 bilingual visitors from districts like Mamaroneck, Ossining, North Shore. So these are very, New York driven. Scotch Plains came. They all had existing DLI programs. What we were really impressed by from the team, the level of expertise that these visitors had, also that they were bilingual and that they could talk to students and parents in Spanish and in English was really impressive to the focus groups that we house. So as I shared earlier, the bullet points here are what they were looking at artifacts wise, including schedules, student work samples, our program report from last summer. And then they also conducted classroom observations. They did focus groups of parents, students, staff, and board members. And they had them in English and in Spanish. That was something that was missing in our CAL program review. They did not do a focus group with our Spanish-speaking parents. This visit, we were able to do so and got really great feedback from our Spanish-speaking parents. And also conducted one-on-one interviews with administrators who were involved with the program, as well as central office staff. So here were our 3 essential questions that were created by our executive committee and joined with the Tri-States Consortium. So what about, is there a shared vision? So we have a program in 2 buildings, but is there a shared vision for Princeton Public Schools DLI program? To what extent does the program have appropriate admissions criteria, staffing, and research-based curriculum instruction and assessment? And then to what extent does the program meet the academic and social emotional needs of all learners, meaning our native Spanish speakers, our native English speakers, students with disabilities, and students who require tiered academic support? So we're going to break it down by each essential question and then talk about their commendations and their recommendations. Just so you all know, for the audience, this slide deck and the full report, it's about 10 pages, will be on the DLI webpage tomorrow morning on the Princeton Public Schools site. So it's full access of anyone who's interested. The slide deck and the report will be there. So here are commendations about a shared vision. They really thought that the elementary program in existence, as we said, we were talking about this for 10 years, is a very strong one. And that Deneen and her team really have a clear vision of what does it look like at Community Park. They also love the idea that a lot of programs end at the end of elementary school. They thought it was great that we intended, to continue it on to the middle school level. They thought our teachers were phenomenal, that they were open to professional growth and feedback. They wanted to hear from other districts about what they were doing in their DLI programs, that they wanted to try new curricular materials. So the level of professionalism they thought that our staff had was really to be commended. They thought that we really utilized community resources and that we work with different community organizations and celebrate multilingualism and really want to connect that to our strategic plan. And they said that students are proud. They see this as their identity, that they are part of this program and that they are a global citizen and that they are bilingual or multilingual, because a lot of times the students in this program, it's a third language for them. And that parents and students also feel a sense of belonging in the program. So those were all commendations about a shared vision. Here's where we can do some work. They talked about having a district vision rather than a 2-school vision. So as I shared at the beginning, moving out to the high school will help that. But how do we also bring in our other elementary schools and talk about what does DLI look like and help families from maybe other zones also think about DLI for themselves? Action steps about communication of the benefits from the program. I hope you guys are seeing that we've done a really big advertising push in both English and in Spanish for DLI this year. We really want to engage high school staff now too. If this program is moving to the high school, how do we make sure they understand what this looks like and the proficiency levels of the students that they're working with? One of the suggestions as well is, as they were here visiting, we were talking about our strategic plan work and having strategic plan meetings, and they said, well, how does this fit, being bilingual, being part of this program, into your portrait of a graduate or your strategic plan goals? Also, about an end game for students. So there's something in the state of New Jersey called the Seal of Biliteracy. Does Princeton want to apply for that program so that when students end their high school career, they can take a placement assessment and receive a Seal of Biliteracy on their diploma, whether they're going off to earn a degree or going out into the field? Having that statement that you are fully bilingual, that you have that skill set is a superpower, obviously, in today's world. And then they also said having more time. So within the buildings, the DLI staff have time, but having that, once again, across the continuum, having the K-12 time to sort of have that vertical articulation, as we call it in the curriculum field. And then once again, where we think we really need continued advocacy and support is making sure that we're reaching out to our Spanish-speaking families, our heritage Spanish-speaking families, about the benefits of the program and why it could help students to have strength in both their native language and in learning English. So essential question 2 is more about my area, the curriculum instruction and assessment, as well as staffing. So they think that it's great that with our admissions, we opened it up as an entire district program across the 4 zones, that we provide transportation, that we have done a phenomenal job of finding bilingual staff in the various roles. The state is actually thinking about changing certification for DLI, and our district is working on advocacy about why that's a bad idea and the nation's largest staffing crisis that we've experienced in decades. They also commended that, and thank you to the board for providing support for the benchmark materials that we purchased last summer. So that's been really a Spanish literacy program that we brought to Community Park this school year. They were very impressed by the fidelity of the target language in classrooms and the extemporaneous speaking of our middle school students, having a conversation with them, because to them, that was the most impressive part, that they get to have a 30, 45-minute conversation fully in Spanish with our middle school students, and that they weren't grappling or having awkward pauses, that it was just natural to them. So that was a testament to the program. And that we have a lot of external resources because teachers have had to develop, things along the years to help students thrive in the program, and that our staff are very creative. So what they want to think more of, and held up the mirror, as I said, is, how do we have benchmarks along the way? I think we got away from this a little bit with the pandemic. So we had Apple testing in 3rd and 5th grade. So that measures proficiency in the target language. So talking with Ms. Russell, our supervisor of world language, DLI and ESL, as well as our principals at CP and PMS, bringing back those benchmarks. So when I was talking about assessing our 8th grade students, that would be the Apple assessment to provide what proficiency level of language do our students have, and tracking that and having some data around that. And then thinking about recruitment strategies for the program. So signs, ads, reaching out to our community liaisons, the WhatsApp, thinking about every way, shape, and form of doing recruitment. We did provide more information on the district website and through our registration materials, and had a Spanish translation button added to the website. More training for staff on curriculum materials and coaching visits. What I would really love is being part of this consortium. Now we have relationships with some of these people who were here for 3 days and doing site visits next year to some of their programs that have been in existence for 20 years in some cases. So particularly Deneen at CP was very excited by that, and taking a team of staff to do some PD in conjunction with some of these other school districts would be great. Doing a district-wide audit of our English language learners at other schools to determine, who's not coming and why to the program if they're native Spanish speakers, and making sure that the program is really supporting RLs and that they're giving them the skills that they need to develop strength in both languages. And finally, really, once again, is working with our other elementary principals so that if they have English language learners registering at the other schools, saying, hey, have you heard about our DLI program? This is a benefit. Unfortunately, there's a stigma in the Spanish-speaking community, and I talked with my West Windsor colleagues about this as well, that, they want their children to be successful and learn English, and that they sometimes don't see in our Spanish-speaking community the benefits of being strong in both languages. And so West Windsor is also having some roadblocks about granting that access. So I think it's how do we develop trust and relationships and talk about the benefits and getting us out to the community and getting the community into the schools to see the benefit. And then finally, the last one is how are we meeting the academic and social emotional needs of all learners across the tiers? So they thought it was great that we have, bilingual special education teacher, AIS, academic intervention services provider, that our teachers know our students. The kids want more. Like they kept saying in the focus groups, the kids were like, we want more language, we want more. And they're like, but you're speaking in the language and that you're speaking for such a long period of time. So that was really good feedback. They thought we, especially during the pandemic, focusing on social emotional learning, particularly at the elementary level, was a strength, that the parents are supportive, the kids are overall happy with the program. And as I said, they want to further desire to be challenged. And I think by going up to that high school level and having science and Spanish and other opportunities in electives, et cetera, once they get past that AP Spanish level, with the goal of getting to AP Spanish in 10th grade, if you were a DLI student, will be really fruitful. Where we need to do the recommendations is, once again, what are our benchmarks? What are our outcomes for students in the program? And across different demographic groups, are they meeting those benchmarks that we're looking for? Have student work samples and have teachers come together and talk about, this is a stronger example of this. This is an area that needs growth. How do we go and assess and say where we can meet students' needs? One of the struggles at the middle school is the master schedule. So if you're a student who has an IEP and is in the DLI program, or an L and in the DLI program, there's certain conflicts that happen with the schedule. So how do we make that work for students instead of, saying, oh, it can't because the schedule doesn't allow it? How do we try to find ways to navigate around it? Grade level benchmarks. And as I shared, is what besides vocabulary, that seal of biliteracy, and exploring that option for our school district for the 24-25 school year. So overall takeaways, once again, they were really impressed by our staff and students and the ability of our students to speak in Spanish. They really admired the professionalism and energy. I can't say enough that part of the consultancy, we were in this space right here, and it was about 40 to 50 staff members from across the district working with the consultancy team, and they were asking us questions, and you could just see the reflection of our staff and the excitement of wow, because remember, they're sort of isolated in this program, right? And so to say, these are other experts who have ideas and resources that could benefit us, I think was really beneficial to that team. They called our program an unpolished gem. We sort of got halted with the pandemic, and, there's a lot of reasons why, you wouldn't want to try a program like this in a pandemic, right? Because it's virtual, or you're wearing masks and you can't see language and lip reading and things along those lines. So as we come out of that, how do we do not a reboot, but a reset and a new focus forward as we talk about our strategic plan? And so next steps, as I said, conduct site visits, I think would be a really great thing for our team to do, and give time staff to collaborate with the benchmark materials, with articulations. Could you try again? My watch is talking to me. I think it's saying time to end. Instructional models assessment. And so we want to consider focusing on that early years as sort of our draft strategic plan talks about, offering advanced Spanish at the middle school level, advanced Spanish at the high school level with AP in 10th grade, courses at the high school, and that seal of biliteracy attainment. That's where we really want to put our focus. And then we really, and I've earmarked in budget, looking over here at Matt for next year, a district committee to talk about, how do we do better outreach? how do we bring in these benchmark assessments along the way, not with the curriculum benchmark, but sort of those goalposts throughout the curriculum so that we know where students are. How do we leverage more forms of advertising, et cetera? Elizabeth Collier, who was here, yep, there she is in the back over there, has done exceptional work of getting the word out there. So thank you, Elizabeth, for all your efforts the past few weeks to do that, because we do think there's great benefits to the program. And lastly, I just wanted to say thank you to the committee because they did so much work, our admin team, the staff in each building, because, we had to move schedules around and do site visits and everything like that. Our focus group students, the board, our parents who came, we had several parent groups. We appreciated their time. And then I had to do a shout out to G. Bazuski because she organized all the food and housing for the staff. And they were very pleased with their olives and their business bistro and staying at the Nassau Inn. So that's kind of where we are right now. As the board knows, you have your 10-page report that goes even more in depth, and that will be on the website as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sue, for that.
I have a comment. So may I? Because we have centralized registration, you can tell where the family lives in terms of, the CP kids or whatever, only because you mentioned something about the principals telling kids, but at least when they start registering, we do have the centralized, so.
And it's great because I overhear every conversation
then there
in
you
my
go.
office.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
and having the materials ready. But I think sometimes they're already like half signed up. So you know how it is nowadays, right? They go onto the website and they're like, I'm this family in this zone, and they come in. And so they're already sort of half sold on the idea of being in that home zone. Or saying like, I don't really know what DLI is, so I want something else. And so we're really trying to work on, that communication piece when they get here and say, well, have you heard about this program? And here are the benefits and things like that. And working with our community liaison as well, who helps with translation during the registration process. I think that's good.
Because it's all
here now. Yes.
That's like a benefit.
But I think, once again, what they said is that helping the other buildings see the benefit of it as well, because we do have English language learners who are Spanish speakers, in other buildings. Not a ton, but some. And I think it'd be helpful for them to say, hey, have you thought about, instead of getting this other service, you wouldn't necessarily require it. You'd be part of the mainstream program at a school like CP.
Right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So am I on? I think so. I remember us talking at some point that we would have a goal, or there'd be an ideal balance in the program of like 50-50 maybe it was when we were talking to I was part of the tri-state thing, and we got to talk to the other educators. It was just really a very interesting conversation. And they were saying that they often try to look at a model of 50-50, so 50% native Spanish speakers and then 50% non, and that's a kind of an ideal learning environment. And I'm wondering if that's something that came up or that we talked about, and if so, how far are we from that?
Sure. So that's great. And so thank you for bringing that up, Beth. So there's two 50-50s. There's the 50-50 immersion model, meaning 50% Spanish and 50% English. That's the model, the instructional model that we use. And then there's 50-50 representation of heritage speakers, right? So when we look at our actual demographics, I don't know if it warrants a 50-50, but I would love like a 60-40 if possible. And so that's why I think there's that concerted outreach to our Spanish speaking families and getting them in the program, because I think it's much more beneficial if there is a balance of heritage speakers across it. So yes, that did come up in the report. And that's one of the things they said is when they did focus groups with our Spanish speaking families, they brought up the stigma as well. And that, working with some of the staff members that they felt they had a relationship with, especially at CP, it seems, that they decided to join the program and that they were very happy that they joined the program. So word of mouth also has been helpful for sure. But I think when you talk about outreach, it's us getting out. So working with some of the CP staff as well, we talked about doing community nights. And I think way back when the program was starting, I believe Dr. Ginsburg was knocking on doors, in neighborhoods with Liliana as well. So like doing that again, getting back to some of those practices, I think would be helpful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I just want to thank you, Dr. Tu and Dr. Kelly as well, for really taking the time and the support to show a focus on this sort of from a district-wide level. So my colleagues know my son has been in the program since the start. I always have to have that disclaimer. One thing that was talked about was this data, right? Having more data, assessing where the students are more frequently. Are you thinking of ways to share that not only with parents, but with the board and
Yes.
the community as well?
Mhm.
Are you thinking sort of maybe different times throughout the year?
That's a great question. So that would be something that I would love the committee's input on, like with staff. Off the top of my head, I would say like 3rd, 5th, 8th grade, like, you know, like kind of doing along the way. One of the things that the DLI Tri-State team recommended too, they said in a program like this, you also have to think about soft skills, like the way that kids feel confident with their facility of the language, right? So creating student work samples, some other ways to show growth besides just the Apple assessment, which I think was really helpful. They're like, we're not saying not do that, but they're saying, what are some other ways that you can say, for example, we had a 45-minute conversation and they were able to participate the entire time, right? Some other benchmarks with it, or observational data where, you know, you have students come in and you guys talk with them or interview. Yeah. So that would be something that we'd want that, that follow through on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I've seen the hard work all throughout, and I honor our staff as well. It's been a great deal of work. So thanks very much.
Anyone else? Okay, so we look forward to hearing more about plans for the program in the coming months. Thank you. And Dr. Kelly, did you have anything else?
No, thank you. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on now to item J, the public forum, public comment on agenda items and non-agenda items. If you would like to speak, please come to the podium and let us know your name and street you live on. No takers for public comment? Okay. I always give it a second. All right. Moving on now to item K1, harassment, intimidation, and bullying. That is going to be part of the consent agenda. Item L, governance, semi-annual student safety data report. Is there a presentation?
I can, not really. It's the report is required by the state.
Okay.
So it's just the information that's there.
Okay.
If you click on it, you'll see the number of incidents that were reported. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on now to item M. Did anyone have any questions? No. Moving on to item M1, board committee highlights, and we'll start with the equity committee with co-chairs Betsy Baglio and Debbie Braunfeld.
Thanks very much. For 2023, the Equity Committee will actually work as a committee of the whole, meaning that our meetings will be noticed so the full board will be able to attend. There'll be some professional development for the board on equity issues, but we're also opening these meetings to the public. 2 will take place in person and 2 will take place online. So the first meeting, we're excited to announce, will coincide with the State of the District, which is a new annual event that Dr. Kelly is planning for our community. It'll take place in one of our schools on Monday evening, February 27th, so stay tuned for more details. The other dates, and this is for the board and the public, will be virtual on May 15th and November 27th, and September 18th we'll meet in person. We're hoping to do a community book discussion in September, so people could perhaps do some reading over the summer. So we look forward to engaging with the public and our fellow board members. Thanks.
Thank you, Betsy. Moving on now to long-term planning with Chair Beth Berend.
The long-term facilities planning committee met on January 19th. We reviewed the demographic update that is going to be presented to the board and the public on Tuesday, February 7th. And our next meeting is on February 16th.
Thank you, Beth. Moving on now to operations with co-chairs Susan Cantor and Brian McDonald.
I'll give my report and Brian can fill in. I was coming off anesthesia, so if I leave anything out, you can correct me. So we met on January 11th at 8 a.m. We had a very full agenda, first going over the punch list from the items from this past summer's work. And Matt Bolding discussed how our bid would be going out, I guess it's any day now, for the work to be done next summer. We then had an update on our technology plan, and we discussed the needs that the district has in order to satisfy both administrative needs and teaching needs and enhancements to the system that we're probably going to have to consider in the years to come to satisfy the needs of the district. We then, as we always do, discuss sustainability and with Jenny Ledmer, and we discussed with some of the public that attended how the work was going on our eco labs, and we've been getting great input from the public, and so that's been a great partnership as we continue to work toward getting those back up and running the way the district would like to see. We then got a presentation on a potential cafeteria renovation that would allow at PHS students to get their lunch in a much quicker manner and do some upgrades like adding dishwashing, which is very good for sustainability. We heard a presentation on a security presentation on quotes for window pane adjustments that would be for safety in our schools, and then some issues of ongoing interest to the public, like the playgrounds that we continue to look at and make assessments for to hopefully do improvements in the coming months. So everyone, our meetings are usually open. Our next meeting, I believe, will be closed, but after that, we welcome the public back to our meetings. Thank you.
Is it anything to add, Mr. McDonald? No, I would like to just add that as we move down the curriculum, down the agenda, item P, curriculum and instruction, Mr. Bolden found a grant to apply for $100,000 that would support the remediation of our elementary school playgrounds. So thank you to Mr. Bolden.
Well, fingers crossed we get it.
If we get it, but thank you for finding it. Yeah, we appreciate it, and fingers crossed. Okay, moving on now to personnel with Chair Debbie Braunfeld.
And Mara.
And Mara Franceschi. Yes, we're aware that has to be updated.
Okay.
Oh, and Mara's speaking.
I'm speaking.
Great.
The Personnel Committee met on Thursday, January 12th. We heard from Dr. Tu on preliminary staffing needs for the 2023-24 school year. The committee discussed the process and types of information that are in a staff member's personnel file. Tonight, the board will be asked to approve Jenna Peluso for the gifted and talented teacher position for K through 5. Tonight, the board will also be asked to approve a new job description for a food system literacy coordinator. And this position will start as a pilot program with funding from the Princeton School Garden Cooperative, and if successful, will then be funded through the Food Service Fund dollars. And the committee also discussed several other personnel issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on now to policy with co-chairs Beth Berend and Jean Durbin.
Thanks.
So the policy committee met on January 13th, 8:15 a.m. We spent the majority of the meeting going over Policy Alert 229 from Strauss Esme, which held a host of policies that are on the agenda this evening for first read. And most of them, all of them, are non-substantive changes just meant to comply with laws and regulations. We next meet on February 10th, 8:15 in the morning, virtual. Thanks.
Thanks, Jean. And now moving on to student achievement with co-chairs Betsy Baglio and Michelle Tuck-Ponder. Sarah remembered.
Great. I'm going to do the report this month. We're going to switch off.
All right.
This meeting of the Student Achievement Committee on January 11th was a very short public meeting. We welcome the committee. The committee this year is Michelle and I co-chairing. Daphne, Susan, and Mara are our committee members. We are changing the time of the day of the week to Fridays. So Student Achievement will now meet on Fridays at 11:30. February 3rd is our next meeting. The topic on our public agenda was the PHS debate tournament trips. We discussed those. We had a period for public comment, and then we adjourned to closed session. So we invite the public to attend on February 3rd.
Any questions? Oh, all right. Thank you very much, Betsy. Moving on now to item N1, policies up for first reading. Just stop me if you have any questions. All right. Moving on to item O, personnel. O1 resignations, O2 retirements, O3 appointments, O4 transfer reassignment, 05, PRIA salary guide step movement. 06, PRESA aid stipend. 08, 07, leave of absence. 08, substitute student placement. 09, student services. 010, curriculum and instruction. 011, sixth period compensation. 012, personnel items. 013, job description. Moving on to item P1 student day field trips. Is that an action item?
Yes.
Okay, can I get a motion, please? Mara, second Betsy.
Daphne Kendall,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
Yes. I'm sorry, why is it an action item? Are we having a discussion?
We can have discussion.
Why is it an action item?
A board member requested that it be an action item.
Because why?
They want to vote no.
That's my discussion. All right, if we could have discussion on it. Could we have discussion on it?
Sure, we can have discussion on it.
Anybody want to share?
On this one, is anyone,
Not on this one, no.
no, not on this one.
Overnight trips, yes,
That's the next one.
I'm happy to respond. You didn't even have to ask me.
Okay, thanks. So wait, so there's no action for the day, but just for the night, maybe?
No, it's action though, so
It
we,
is action.
We're
so we
gonna
have
do
to
it.
Vote it that way. yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Betsy Bagwell,
Yes.
Beth Barron,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Jean Durbin,
Yes.
Mara Franceschi,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Susan Cantor.
Yes.
Motion passes.
okay, now item P2, student overnight trips. Can I please get a motion? Beth, second. Susan? Discussion?
Sure. As I have done for quite some time, I am voting against this overnight trip. I am voting against it because of the cost and because that there are many students who attend our high school who are unable to afford to go on these trips. And I know we have a policy that anyone who cannot afford to go on the trip will cover their expenses. That puts our students in a very, many of our students in a very uncomfortable position where they always have to go and ask for financial support. And I don't think that as a school district, it is fair or appropriate for us to allow trips that are $850 and $1,000 required out of parents' pockets when we can figure out another way. And this is something that Betsy and I are going to be working on this year in SAC. Nonetheless, it discourages students from participating in extracurricular activities because they know that they can't afford the expense of fully participating in the activity. This in particular, I think I am a state champion from National Forensic Public Speaking. So it's not the content. It is our repeated practice and culture in this district that it's okay to turn to parents and say, there is a trip, there is an activity, whether it's in school or out of school, that costs hundreds or thousands of dollars. It's discriminatory and it's inequitable, and I can't support it.
Okay, thanks. I just want to add, these are University of Pennsylvania Liberty Bell Tournament in Philadelphia and Harvard University National Forensics Debate Tournament in Cambridge. And the costs are covered by how?
This particular group has raised money. There is some out-of-pocket expenses, but they have raised some of the money, but there's still significant out-of-pocket expenses for participants.
And for families who can't, as Michelle mentioned, who can't make that out-of-pocket commitment, they are going, and the group is fundraising to cover those expenses.
Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? No? All right. Mr. Bolden, please.
Daphne Kendall,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
No,
Betsy Bagwell,
Yes.
Beth Barron,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Jean Durbin,
Yes.
Mara Franceschi,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Susan Cantor.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Can I say one more thing? Again, it is board policy. It's actual policy that no child is denied due to inability to pay. I believe is it state law?
Oh, I don't know if it's state law,
Okay.
but it's
I've
board policy.
overstepped. I've just created.
It's board policy.
And I do. But it
Board
is
policy,
our-
which actually.
It is our board policy. So if there should never be a situation in this district that is not actually the case. As Michelle said, she and I are going to work on the how
Okay,
and improve this practice.
thank you.
Okay, thank you for that discussion. All right, moving on now to item P3. This was the grant application acceptance for the playground equipment. Thank you again, Mr. Bolden. Twice you get a plus tonight.
That Valerie
Imagine
Ulrich
if-
and others helped on the
Okay.
application.
All right,
Imagine
well,
if
thank
you
you.
got the grant.
Yeah,
the
really?
applause that you get.
Ulrich, sorry, Val.
Very
Does
well.
everyone have their
All
fingers
right, well,
crossed?
thank you, Valerie. All right, moving on to item Q, student services, special education. We have Q1, 2, 3, special education agreements. Q4, educational placement of students, 22, 23. Moving on to item R1, financial reports, R2, fire and evacuation drills, R3, registration travel agenda, R4, joint transportation agreement, Lawrence Township, and R5, sale of excess equipment purchased with federal funds. Any questions? No. Moving on now to item S1, public comment, again, on any topic. Anyone? No? All right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. So we'll move on now to item T1, the consent vote, approved consent agenda items. Can I get a motion, please? Brian, second. Beth.
Daphne Kendall,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
Yes.
Betsy Baglia,
Yes.
Beth Barron,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Jean Durbin,
Yes.
Mara Franceschi,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Susan Cantor.
Yes.
Consent agenda passes.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden. And I do like what you do with that, the alphabet, because it's always changing. So thank you. Keeps us all on our toes. Moving on now to item, but now it's up there, so everyone's looking. So anyway, item U, closing discussion, comment to the board. So I'll just say that our next board meeting will be virtual. And all of our meetings in February will be virtual. The next meeting is February 7th. It's our first budget workshop. We're going to have some preliminary information about what the budget's going to look like for the 23-24 school year, which is incredible. And we are going to have a presentation by our demographer who will provide updated demographic information for the board consideration. So with that, does anyone have any comments they would like to make? No? Nothing? Okay. Can I please, moving to item V1, motion to adjourn? Mara, second. Jean. All in favor? And we're adjourned. All right.